Welcome to the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. I'm Melisa Liberman, a fellow IC and business coach. On this podcast, I teach you to become a consistently booked independent consultant without becoming a pushy salesperson or working 24/7. If I can do it, you can too. Listen on to find out how. Welcome to episode 199 of the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. This is Melisa Liberman, and today I'm excited to talk with you about this concept of starting over. If you're listening to this in the real time, it is the beginning of January 2025. And of course, as we start a new year, it might very well feel as if you're starting over. And you might be listening to this in June and it might feel like you're starting over because you're rolling off of a client and ready to start a new one. Whatever phase of your business you're in or whatever time of year you're in, there are so many times where we feel as if we're starting over. And today I want to flag this for you as a potential saboteur in your business and help you to see where it might be impacting you, this concept of starting over, and help you to see where the impact of that thought process and ultimately what you can do to build a stronger business mindset as it relates to these types of situations, whether it's process oriented in your business or just the time of year. Really important to be clear about how you are not starting over. And that's what we're here to talk about today. All right, let's dive into today's topic. Before we do, though, I just thought I would share with you at the time of recording, it is actually still December 2024. I'm getting ready for some time off, which hopefully, you had a great break for yourself. We're able to recharge your batteries, open up some time and space to think. One of my clients was sharing with me that she likes to schedule a week or two and block that off after the holiday and build that into her overall business schedule because the holidays are so busy. And then in between Christmas and New Year's, the time just seems to fly by. And so she loves to dedicate that time to her family and then set aside a week and a half or even 2 weeks to come back in January, start thinking about her business and what she wants to accomplish in the new year and not rush ahead to trying to start generating leads and hitting the pavement really quickly, that first full week of January. And I thought that was such a great idea that I wanted to share with you right before we get into the heart of the episode, which is, really building those types of what I like to call reentry processes into our business schedule so that we aren't feeling so rushed and so pressured. And when you build out your business calendar in that kind of way, that creates some spaciousness, that creates some predictability and visibility. So you don't feel like you have to get back into full mode on January 6th, for example, can be so valuable. So even if you're not in the position to do that this year, I would recommend doing that, thinking about when you're building out your calendar for the next 12 months, bake in some of those things, whether it's when you return from a holiday, what that looks like, or vacation, or if you have kids, what it might look like to return from kind of summer schedule to school season schedule, really thinking about your particular situation and where you want to bake in some of this extra re-entry time. I think it'd be such a valuable technique to create some more longevity and sustainability in your business. So I know for sure I do that. I like to take off some time in August after my kids go back to school just to regroup and get back into into a fall schedule and to be able to think about the ending of Q3 and what I want to accomplish in Q4. And so this is kind of similar idea of blocking off that first full week in January for you to be doing business planning and strategy type work on your own business. And then, slowly start to roll back into client work and business development work. So an idea to share with you here as a bonus idea as we jump into today's topic, which is you're not starting over. So I'll tell you more about what that means. But first, let's talk about the agenda. So first, we're going to talk about the starting over cycle, what I like to call the starting over cycle. And then we'll talk the impact about that. And I'll give you a really specific example. And then we'll talk about the solution to this, the solution to your starting over cycle and what to do to avoid it and what to do to reduce it if you find yourself there. And then we'll wrap up with putting the steps to put this episode into action. So That is our agenda here for episode 199. Can you believe it? I cannot believe it. 199. Speaking of which, if you haven't yet had a chance, I will ask you for a favor. Can you rate and review this podcast so that more people can find it? I would be tremendously grateful for you to go in and give it how many ever stars you think it has earned and share a review of what you've experienced, what results you've experienced after having listened to the podcast and what you've been able to take away. I would greatly appreciate it, but more so would love for other people to find it as well. Because the more of us who can be successful as independent consultants, the more of a population of us that there are, the more and more it becomes non-option. It's not optional for clients to leverage our skill sets. And we just keep pushing that tipping point that people don't have to be fully employed as a full-time basis as an employee in order to interact with clients and be paid by them. So in terms of the future of work, you'll be contributing to that as well. Okay, so with that, let's dive into today's topic. The companion resource that goes with today's episode is the consultant's yearly plan. It's a yearly planning process, a 5-step process. We talked about it on the podcast a couple of episodes ago, but this is a workbook that goes with it that walks you through step by step to evaluate what you've been doing in your business so that you've got a really good baseline from which then to make decisions about priorities and focuses and goals for the coming 12 months. So go to my website, melisaliberman.com/plan. We'll put the link to that in the show notes. You can go download it, which I've updated it for 2025. So you can go download the most recent version and use that as a framework to put your plans in place. There was someone on Facebook a couple of days ago, as of this recording, who shared it as one of her top planning resources for the coming year, in amongst other things for on a personal level, professional level. And I was so grateful for that. So shout out to her for sharing that on LinkedIn, and hopefully more people are able to find it. Okay, so with that, let's talk about this concept of starting over. So obviously, this is a good example, right? We're in the new year. As of the time you're listening to this, we're in the new year. And of course, that would be the time that most of us think of in terms of starting over. It feels like we're starting over January 1st. And sometimes that can feel fresh and new and exciting. And sometimes it can feel daunting, overwhelming. Like, I can't believe I created all those results that I created last year, or I just started getting momentum and now I feel like I'm starting over, if that sounds familiar to you. It may also come up for you, for example, when an engagement is ending and you feel like you're starting over. I've got to find another client, or when your pipeline is empty and you feel as if you're starting over. Or sometimes when you're brand new you've just started consulting, you feel like you're starting over in your professional life. You went from your career and the title and the label that you were working and the brand under which you were working to starting over on your own. Or another example might be where you start offering something new to your clients, such as moving out of hourly or time-based work into retainers, and it feels as if you're starting over. These are all examples of feeling like you're starting over. And again, in some form or fashion, some of these, maybe not all of them, feel fresh and new and exciting, but that dies down really quickly most of the time. And when I say some of them, I don't think any of us feel fresh and new when our pipeline is empty. So that's why I made that caveat. But for the other things, it might feel kind of fresh and new. I finished that engagement. I'm so excited and thrilled with how it went, and the client was happy. And so there's that feeling and the excitement about having a new client, kind of starting from scratch and having some variety. But then so quickly that, like I said, that newness wears off. And then most often the overwhelm sets in and the feeling of it being so daunting sets in and feels as if we're about to have to climb a new mountain again. You might start thinking about, I'm starting over. I'm back at square one. I've got zero revenue again. And now I've got to build it back up again to whatever my yearly goal is. Or you might be thinking, my pipeline is worth $0 value. Now I've got to start over and build that up again. Or you might be thinking, I'm starting over in my career and professional life because you've left corporate, ready to embark upon this business journey. Whatever it is, think about for you, where is it that you notice you're feeling like you're starting over? And the easiest one is about this new year. So we'll just center our examples around that for the purposes of today's episode. But keeping in mind that you want to be really noticing this for all the different types of scenarios I just shared with you as well, because the warning and the advice I'm about to give you really applies to all of it. Okay, so as we think we're starting over, again, once that newness wears off and the excitement of something, something new and challenging kind of wanes, we're left almost always with the impact of feeling afraid. So think about it for you. If you're sitting here at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the quarter and you're thinking to yourself, I'm starting over. Maybe you already have a contract in place. So, in some ways, you've got some visibility into the cash flow, but it feels as if you went from, hitting your goal last year, let's say of 500K, and now you feel like you have to start over and get to 750K this year, if that's your goal. And you're starting from the starting point again. That's the frame of mind that so many of us have when we are starting off with something new, like a new year. And from that place, the impact is feeling fear and scarcity and a lot of times desperation mode. And from that place, as you well know, when we're afraid that we've got such a big thing to accomplish, or we've got to refill our pipeline, or we've got to somehow create this whole annual goal all over again that either we hit last year or weren't quite, up to the number that we had set, it can create that feeling of desperation and that feeling of scarcity and that worry. Am I going to be able to do this again? If you were really successful last year, you start worrying about, can I repeat that? Or was it a fluke? Or if you didn't quite hit the mark that you had set, imagining, oh no, I wasn't even able to hit my goal last year. How am I ever going to repeat that again, let alone exceed it? That type of thinking is so common to set in for you. And when you start thinking that way, then of course you would start undercharging, or you would agree to take on projects that are red flags that you know that it's not going to probably go well, or this isn't the best fit, but you take it on anyway because of that worry and stress. And you end up underutilizing yourself, not from a time perspective, but from a capability and expertise perspective. And ultimately, you end up perpetuating a cycle of repeating the same results you've been getting year over year, whether it's kind of peaks and valleys in your business, or a feast or famine cycle in your business, or just simply taking on unfulfilling work that doesn't feel like it's what you want to be doing anymore. This idea of I'm starting over can lead to that cycle, and we don't want you to have that cycle. So, that's what we're here to talk about today. Before I tell you the solution, so I really want to bring this to your attention. It's not the fact that there's a new year that creates the worry or the feeling of like, a huge kind of runway that you've got to start marching down. It's not the fact that something new is happening, like an engagement has ended and you're ready to start a new one. It's none of those things that are creating the daunting feeling or the overwhelmed feeling or the worried feeling. It's the idea in your mind that you're starting over from scratch because it's all made up, right? The new January, it's all made up. It's all made up. No one's actually starting from scratch. You have a history of, for example, if you've been in business for a while, you have a history of the last 12 months. And so we want to just be really cautious and cognizant of when we start thinking this idea of I'm starting over and how it creates the overwhelm for you and then ultimately leads you to start worrying and then take on engagements that aren't as fulfilling or utilizing the capabilities you want to be utilizing, aren't generating the revenue that you're wanting to generate, and then creating such a shaky foundation for yourself. It can feel really innocuous, right? Oh, it's a new year, I'm starting over. But that's the impact when you're thinking in that way, that you make it so much bigger than it needs to be when it's all made up in terms of the calendar in this way. So let me give you an example of what I'm talking about in terms of the impact of thinking you're starting over. And then I'll wrap up the episode today, which is a quick hit episode to give you a solution, what to do. Instead of thinking you're starting over, what could you do instead? Here's the example. So we'll call the person Jane. Jane is a consultant. We were working together. And one of the things we were talking about is her yearly goal. And she had set a yearly goal in the previous year and she hadn't hit it. She came very close, but she hadn't hit it. And so she was feeling really worried about the coming year and what kind of goal to set. And so it felt like she was starting over. She was thinking and sharing with me, listen, she said to me, I set a 350K goal. I got to 300 last year. So I feel like I should set a 300K goal this year because it's more realistic than the 350K goal that I didn't even hit. And I want to set myself up for success. And I don't want to, kind of sabotage myself by setting a goal that's too high. I want to set something that's realistic. Some of these thoughts might sound familiar to you, and you might be thinking the same type of thing. And she was just saying to me, I'm starting over and I, really want to be successful this year. And I said to her, you're not starting over. Obviously, it's January, so you could think that, but you are not starting over. We don't need to come at this next year when the fact is you got very close to hitting your goal last year. You got very close to hitting your goal last year. So rather than thinking you're starting over from scratch and that you've now got to somehow get back to 300 from a zero, and of course, then why would you even want to extend it back to 350? It feels like such a big mountain again. Instead of all of that, let's relook at this and think about it and look at it in a different way that sets you up for, better for success here. And so as we were digging into it, what we realized is that for her, setting a quarterly goal was so much more valuable. So, for example, in the previous quarter in Q4, she had generated, it was about 75K, I think, maybe even 100. And so when we think about that, okay, I just generated 75K. Now I'm in the next quarter and I'm going to do that again, the 75K. It didn't feel like, it's such a subtle shift, right? And we're not playing a shell game here. I'm not trying to trick ourselves into, are we starting over? Are we not starting over? That's not the point here. What the point is how do you get your head into a place that helps you to feel more motivated, to feel more inspired, to feel that something is doable? Because when we feel that something's doable and inspiring and motivating, then it's so much easier to go after it instead of feeling daunting and overwhelming and second guessing and questioning and that doubt that comes along with the other way of thinking when you think you're starting over. And so going back to this story with Jane, what we did was we broke it down and we said, listen, this is a rolling process. This is a rolling process where we're never starting over, even if it's January, or we are thinking about this. For her, it was a quarterly basis. For you, it might need to be a monthly basis. But for her, it was a quarterly basis where it felt really much more broken down in a bite-sized piece to say, okay, last quarter, I made 75K and I have all the systems and processes in place again to not only make that 75K this quarter, this rolling quarter, Q1, but I think I can increase it to 100K or 150K. That's what she was saying to me. So, do you notice the difference? Nothing has changed. It's still January in this example I'm giving you, but we're working to set up her mind. And I'll share with you how to do this for yourself in a moment. But for her, we were working to say, okay, how can we set you up from a mindset perspective in the best way possible so that you feel motivated and inspired and that something's doable and possible? Because we're just we're not starting over. We're just repeating what we did in Q4, in Q1. We're not starting from zero. We're starting from the 75K that you made last quarter and building upon that. For her, I think she set a goal of 150 for that next quarter. And the indicator that this is a good way to think about the goal, to think about the year, to think about whatever it is you're working on that might just from scratch kind of by default think like you're starting over. The way to know that the adjustment that you're making is that it feels motivating or inspiring instead of overwhelming or daunting. And so that's how we address this situation. And for her, it felt, she was sharing with me, oh, I just said that kind of in passing that I was starting over. But she said to me, you know what, I realized after we had this conversation and this coaching that you really picked up on and helped me to see that this thought process that sounded really innocent, oh, I'm starting over, it's January, I'm starting over, was really getting in my way and was causing me and would cause me, had I not caught it and redirected it, to make decisions in my business that were not going to set me up for success, that were going to cause me yet again to undercut my pricing and to agree to work that I didn't really want to take on, is what she was saying to me. And when we started thinking about it from the perspective of, no, we're just rolling forward from the last quarter, it started unlocking her ability to think about things differently. And for her to start thinking about, okay, I'm going to start really focusing on building a long term recurring retainer to have some foundational revenue, as an example, and then build upon that with a couple of other strategy type engagements. So that's what it unlocked for Jane, is this ability to say, to not worry about starting over and what a big mountain she had to climb, and therefore lead to this spiral, if you will, or this cycle that creates this second guessing and self doubt and overwhelm. And instead recognize that that is a problem, just a seemingly innocent way of thinking that can really lead to a problem in the sense of repeating over and over again the same type of results. And instead redirecting to say, okay, what else, because that feels so heavy, what else or what other way could I be looking at this to create a more inspiring, motivating situation that helps me to grow? That's what she said to me. And that's what she put in place and was able then to start creating this momentum for herself in her business. So hopefully that example brings to life for you the idea of how the seemingly innocent phrase, I'm starting over or I'm starting fresh, can lead to some real problems in your business and lead you to start off, for example, the new year in a really heavy way. And we don't want that. And so, as we think about this and what Jane and I did to solve that problem for her, uncover the problem, first of all, and then in her way of thinking, and then solve it. Let's talk about how you might solve this problem. So, the first thing is just very simply never to think I'm starting over, because of the impact of what that thought process is. We're not trying to argue with reality here. We're trying to say, okay, every time I think this idea that I'm starting over, it ends up creating such overwhelm, and it leads me down the path of, underselling myself. And so redirecting that for yourself as you notice the ways in which you're thinking you're starting over. I'll give you some examples here in a minute of how to redirect, but you're really catching that, first of all, that you're thinking you're starting over and what the impact is for you. Typically, it's feeling overwhelmed or self doubt. And then getting yourself to the place of both strategically and mentally putting yourself in that place where you're never starting over. You're never starting over. So, let me give you some very tangible examples so that you could put this into practice in your business. The first is that you want to be recognizing where you might be thinking you're starting over so that you can catch that and then build out strategies and mindset to redirect it. And so you want to set yourself up with strategies that avoid that idea of starting over. So let me give you some examples. Let's say that you, from an annual goal perspective, this example that I was sharing with Jane, right? Where you might be doing this too. What's my annual goal? And it feels like you're starting over again. So you might shift that into quarterly goals or even monthly goals that you ultimately know add up to what you want to be building in a year's time or a 3 years time, but you're making it so much smaller so it doesn't feel so big and fall into that trap of starting over. That was the example that I shared with you with Jane that you could be putting in thinking about for you in your business. The other example from a strategy perspective is you set yourself up never to start over with lead generation, for example. You might ramp it down when you're really busy, and fully utilized with a client, but you never stop. You're always doing some form or fashion of lead generation. Your thought leadership, going to an event a month, having a networking or call or two every week, getting yourself to the place from a strategic perspective that you're never starting over. This can be really valuable so that you just don't put yourself in a situation where it feels like you're starting from scratch. The other component to this, in terms of a solution to this idea of starting over and the overwhelm that comes with it, is that you want to be figuring out a new way of thinking about it in order to move from overwhelm to motivation. You want to redirect to think from a different perspective. That's the second half of the solution to this. Let me give you an example. Let's say that you just launched your business, you just left corporate, and you're saying to yourself, I'm just starting, I'm new, I'm starting out, or I'm starting over in my career in a different way. You could argue with me that that's technically accurate, and it is in some way. However, you want to be thinking about what's the impact to you. When you think, I just started my business or I'm starting over, it again feels daunting and overwhelming. And it also discounts all of the experience that you have and almost in some ways erases so much of what you've already accomplished. And so rather than thinking I'm starting over, even if you just launched your business and technically you started the business on January 1st, as an example, when you think to yourself, I'm just starting over, then you want to be redirecting this to something different, which is I'm not starting over. I'm just working with clients in a different way. So let's say that you went from your corporate career and you had a title and all this responsibility. Likely you were doing some form of project work while, in those capacities. You were leading initiatives, you were leading projects, you were setting strategy for your organization, whatever it is that you were doing. All of those are projects, those are engagements. You were acting as a consultant internally in so many different ways. So, giving yourself credit for that and recognizing that experience, even though you were getting paid by a paycheck, why does it matter? We make up all these random rules for ourselves, right? Why does it matter if you were being paid by a paycheck every 2 weeks or every month compared to being paid by a client as a consultant? At the end of the day, the nature of the work is so similar. And so you want to be thinking about how similar it is versus how different it is. And so rather than thinking I'm starting over in my career or I'm starting from scratch in a business, you're redirecting to think from a different perspective mentally, that all your experience counts, that you think back to and really capture and get clear about all the different types of initiatives you've done over the course of your professional life and how those all add up to experience and expertise that can benefit your clients. So hopefully this gives you some really tangible examples of where you might be thinking you're starting over, like in this example of the new year, or when your pipeline is empty, or when you've just launched your business. When you think that seemingly innocent thought that I'm starting over, what the impact of it could be, and how it keeps you recreating the same results over and over again, plus or minus, and instead getting yourself to the place where you can escape that cycle of thinking and start moving forward, that you're never starting over, that you're always building on something, whether it's last quarter's results or last month's results or the bulk of your career that you had accomplished in corporate, and building upon that and never allowing yourself to think that you're starting over in this situation where it creates that overwhelm or the self-doubt or the lack of motivation. As we wrap up today's episode, I want to give you a couple of reminders to put this episode into action. The first is to go download that plan, that yearly plan. Think about it and start building out and mapping out your year, if you haven't done so already, from the perspective of, I am building upon what I just did last quarter or last year versus I'm starting over. And you can go find that at melisaliberman.com/plan. And the second is getting one-on-one help. For most of us, it's really difficult to see these things for ourselves because we're in our own head and we're used to our own ways of thinking, our own ways of being, and what's coming naturally to us. And it can be so difficult to get out of our own head and to see where we're getting in our own way. And that's where I come in. I am a one-on-one coach that can help you to see where you're getting in your own way, where you're suppressing your results or sabotaging yourself, and help you break out of that cycle so that you can achieve the goals that you want to achieve and create that growth in your business that you're looking for, toward that wildly successful vision that you might have in your head but are questioning whether it's possible. So if that sounds like something that would be beneficial to you and your business, you can reach out to consultmelisa.com and set up a coaching exploratory call. where we'll talk about what your specific situation is and determine if coaching is a good fit. All right. Thanks for tuning in, and I will see you again next week for episode 200. All right. We'll see you then. Thanks for joining me this week on the Grow Your Independent Consulting Business podcast. If you liked today's episode, I have 3 quick next steps for you. First, click subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to make sure you don't miss future episodes. Next, leave me a review in your podcast app so other independent consultants can find and benefit too. And finally, to put the ideas from today's episode into action, head over to melisaliberman.com for the show notes and more resources to help you grow your consulting practice from your first few projects into a full-fledged business. See you next week.